All right, I'm just sharing my screen. Hopefully people can see it now. And
Yeah.
attached to your to the invite that went out today is a copy of this also. It's just a cut copy paste, so just in case anybody wants to see that. I think the easiest way to do it is just start at the top and go through it and see if anybody has any concerns or questions or things that we should be talking about. Speak now, or the next step would be to send this over to the printers and have them format it and see if we can get that back. So I think the bold part there is we ask you to support and commit to the following fiscal regulatory issues to ensure a child's access to a high quality, sound basic education is not dependent on their zip code. Your commitment will also prevent your school districts from declaring educational insolvency due to a lack of fiscal and or regulatory support. And I think that's pretty much a cut copy paste out of last year's paper. I don't think that's really changed a lot. Anybody have any questions, concerns? I'll just keep on going through then. Commit to a 3-year phase-in of an updated foundation formula that's equitable, consistent, and predictable. Changes to the foundation must take into consideration increased poverty experienced in our area and the increased need for services required by our students. Anybody have any questions? I had reached out to NYSBA to ask them to clarify what, if there's something specific that we can talk about in terms of a change, but I haven't heard back from them, but at least that's go ahead, Jim.
Tom, the Oneida County Soups met today with Griffo, Button and Salka. And, they reiterated what you just said, Tom. So that's on their list too.
Good. Okay. Broadband, the next point then is broadband capacity must be available to all our school buildings and student homes. Virtual programs last year showcased the critical need for this infrastructure in both our rural and city schools. Broadband should be treated as any other public utility. Next is raise the salary cap on the aidable portion for BOCES itinerant personnel. Next is raise the tax cap levy limit in the following ways. Eliminate the supermajority vote. Next bullet is allow for a minimum base of 2% levy increase. Next bullet is exclude additional financial school safety issues from the formula. And then in parentheses, SRO, SPOs. Next bullet is include pilot properties covered by payments in lieu of taxes in the tax-based growth factor. Next bullet is making the starting point for tax cap calculations, the allowable levy growth, a true 2%, not the lesser of 2% or inflation. Next bullet is extend to 3 years a carryover provision, which allows schools to carry over excess levy. And the final bullet is include properties covered in payments in lieu of taxes, pilots, in the tax-based growth factor. So we've got a lot of bullets on that one.
Tom, Griffo, I guess today said the same thing, that, with Cuomo gone, this is probably the best time to try to get some changes in that. So
one thing I would just mention, schools are affected greatly by pilots, but we don't have a place at the table when a pilot is being considered. So we find out after the fact, which it would be nice if we had at least a place at the table. I don't know that about a vote, that would be nice too, but
at least an invitation to the table would be a nice start.
Yeah, right.
In years past, Tom, I know we had that as a point, and we've dropped that. I think we dropped it last year.
With school board, so see you later on.
Okay,
but I don't even think the schools are even notified until after it's a done deal, unless you're lucky.
No, you could be notified after it's all done, perhaps, or not.
Robert, I think part of the problem is going to be we need to make a stance with our local Oneida-Madison-Herkimer industrial association so that we can get at least notified. Because I think that's what they're going to tell us. You know, they're going to say, "Hey, listen, that's that's
But there at least ought to be a requirement for notification. I mean, think about it for just for a minute. If a miracle happens, multiple miracles, and something takes off of this chip plant, they could be handing out pilots left and right that could devastate Whitesboro, anybody in 20-mile radius, especially in Whitesboro. It's going to be right next door.
Right.
You got to have some kind of requirement to notify. I mean, if they're going to change something at the mining operation just up the hill from me, I get a notification by law because I border their land.
Well, to Jim's point, we might, although we may not be able to affect a change directly, since they, from what I understand, those local agencies don't have any control over the law, but they might be an ally. So I think it would be worth, or at least talking with them would keep us from them, perhaps from being an enemy.
They would certainly be an ally, but not every place is going to have an industrial development committee. I mean,
no, that's right.
It's almost like you've got to have a time. I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere with me, Tom.
Yeah.
If your local town boards are not required to notify school, and you hear about it after the fact at the diner or at Stewart's, that's too late.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
I'd be looking to get something a bit more tangible to other elected officials who are in the same vicinity. Not just some industrial development committee that's appointed perhaps by someone.
Yeah, no,
more teeth in that.
Yeah, I guess that would be a good first step, is just to find out, for myself anyway, really understand the process so that we can look for strategic allies, and maybe have a little more wallop than just working by ourselves.
Yeah.
So there have been a kind of a broad, a couple different proposals that have been presented here. One is we should be notified. Also, somebody suggested we should be part of the committee that grants the pilots, maybe a non-voting member. And third is to keep it kind of unspecific and say, I don't know, we want an integral role. We want to play a role in pilot payments. So what are we asking for here? What do we want to put down?
Well,
can I just interject? I mean, school districts do get notified when there are hearings on pilots. So I don't want people to think that there's no notification prior to those pilots being approved. Now, again, to what extent does the school district really have a say in the distribution of taxes or whether or not the pilot's going to get approved? I think it's minimal, but at least from a notification standpoint, we do get notified when they're going to have those hearings and those discussions on those. And we do have an invitation to attend if we want to.
Is that in statute or is that by your own locality?
I don't know. I just know from, we get it from Mohawk Valley Edge. That's the industrial development agency that covers our area.
And that's the benefit to having that, but it's not, that doesn't appear that it would be in statute then. I mean, they aren't elected officials. I mean, it's a nice courtesy, and it's, from our point of view, it's wise, but we had a pilot issue on something a few years ago, way after the fact, or some of these places that are, putting up solar panel farms. You start giving those pilots, it's gonna, or more wind power or something. That's not definitive that the school boards know. I don't think. I mean, I think it's a bit much. I would love to ask for a seat at the table, but that's a couple of checkers moves out there. I think you at least kind of ask to be upon when the locality receives the request. I think I'd like to see some kind of statute that says your schools in that district have to be notified from that local township or whatever it is. At least that way you can perhaps get involved or ask. I think it's an awful lot to right off the bat ask for a vote at the table.
Well, let me work on that. I hear what you're saying. I'll write that down, and I should be able to come up with something. Because Dr. Belair, thank you for that comment. And I will say that VVS, I know we've had agenda items different times about solar farms, you know, saying that this is, they're thinking about, so no, we don't have any vote in it, but I know that we get informed about some of these pilot issues. I don't know whether all of them, I don't know whether it's a courtesy. I can find out about that though.
And I have one other quick thing because I couldn't unmute myself quick enough. On the itinerant personnel, raising the salary cap, do we have an amount that we're trying to target to get that up to?
I don't think we've really come up with.
Raise?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's a figure for that. I think you're right though. I think I'd like to see that. That's kind of the next step, is to see if we can flesh some of these things out. You know, I mean, in the past we've had them just as these bullets.
I mean, because on some of these where they raised it up last time, it was $5,000, and we were saying, you know, we need this to get up to 50, 55,000 to even have some kind of real potential change for us. I wonder if they, you know, even if we say currently this, we'd like to get up to 50 and not just $5,000 a year for the next 3 years. That's not gonna.
Yeah, there was that for the SROs. I think they said last time we met.
Yeah. And it may be something similar with the itinerant personnel. Again, you're trying to get more stuff through BOCES, but you know, if it's a small amount, it's barely worth it.
Well, I wonder if it may make sense. I know when we talk about this issue in particular, I think the number actually goes back to somewhere in the early to mid 90s when that cap was actually established at 30,000. So if we just time value adjust the money to today's standard and figure out what the value of that is in 2021, maybe that gives us a place to start with the ask to say, look, at least give us what the value of $30,000 would be today based on 1994 or whatever happened to be.
And so I think we did mention this before. Jim or Tom may have mentioned, you know, the last time they know it went up or where this last dollar amount was from decades ago. Yeah. I don't remember what the number was or how long ago, but I'm with you. I wondered if Jim had mentioned it had gone back to the late 70s, maybe, and even further than that.
I can do some research on that, Bob. And I'll also do some research about the school districts being part of a pilot payment and see if I can reach out to some people.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. Next one, propose and support legislation.
Before we go on, I'm sorry, this is Mike.
Sure.
Can we go back to broadband? Can we make put affordable broadband capacity? Because sometimes the wire in front of the house, and if you don't, sometimes it might be too costly for some of these folks. So if we could, there's some way we could tie it to school use to bring the price down. So can we put affordable broadband in there somehow or some way?
Yeah, actually, I've done a little bit of research about that. Is that Frank? I'm sorry.
Mike Clements and Frank.
Mike, I'm sorry, Mike. Yeah, that this is an issue according to NISBA. I forget who we talked to up in NISBA, but they were saying that that there's statewide support for increasing broadband capacity. However, the issue is seen as two different things. Primarily upstate, it's seen as an access issue. In more urban areas, downstate, it's seen as a cost issue. And there are some programs out to give people extra, if as long as you qualify for Medicare, or there's a whole bunch of different things that there is money out there to assist people with it. I don't know how well known that is, but and I don't have any problems with adding that to it. So I can add affordable broadband should be treated as any other public utility or something like that.
So something like that would be
Yeah.
great. So just, and I'm sure a lot of people don't know there's assistance for that stuff out there.
Yeah, when we brought that up, I forget when that, I think it was when we met this summer with Brian Miller, and we talked a little bit about that, and he was kind of actually the one that first told me about it, that those things, that there is money out there. And so I did do a little bit of research, and there is some, but I don't know how widespread, how widely informed that is. And I don't know how much schools really want to take the role in, lining that kind of extra, because it's not coming from the schools, it's coming from some sort of one of those funds somewhere.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Next, propose and support legislation that will change the burden of proof for CSE litigation from the schools defendants to plaintiffs. This will follow the vast majority of the states that have this code and law, and will prevent unscrupulous attorneys from filing frivolous lawsuits. And I know there was support for this with the legislators last year. Anybody have any comments about this? Changes to make to it?
Well, that's something that we actually talked about today too, when we met with Marion Buttonshaw, Joe Griffo, and John Sulka. And there was actually Brian Miller had one of his aides there, and we talked about this again, and they are all very supportive of the idea. Again, if you look at the Supreme Court decision in 2005, they rightly so assigned the burden of proof to the party seeking relief, which in most cases, would be the parents or the plaintiffs, but it's theoretically possible it could be the school district initiating due process as well. But I think what really drives this home is there are about 5 states who put the burden of proof on the school district, New York being one of them. And when you look at the percentage of due process cases in the country, 40% are in New York State. So when you think about that number, it's astronomical. And the money that school districts spend not only defending frivolous lawsuits, they also will overspend on special education services because they will make concessions and acquiesce to demands that they otherwise wouldn't agree to in an effort to avoid litigation. And, so again, that's one I feel very strongly about as the former director of special programs. I did write an advocacy brief on this a year or so ago, and I'm not sure if, as I know, school NISBA has taken this on as one of their legislative priorities. And Tom, maybe I can send you the advocacy brief too that gives some of the data and the history of this issue that may help bolster its chances.
Dr. Bella, if you send that to me, I'll make sure and send it out to the whole legislative committee.
Yep, I will definitely do that. Thank you.
Good. And like I said, I know last time we talked about this last year, and there was, they were all very supportive of this issue. Next issue is allow combinations of school districts or BOCES to establish regional high schools and authorize BOCES to issue diplomas. This will allow small rural districts to form regional-based partnerships that will expand curriculum offerings and programs for students. Next one, allow schools to maintain an unrestricted fund balance of up to 8%. It's at 4% now, I think.
Right.
What's kind of interesting, some of these came from the Superintendent's Association, and they had them listed as, and we may want to do that when we do the paper, these that group the issues that really have a zero cost impact on budgets, that them allowing schools to maintain an unrestricted fund balance of 8% doesn't impact state budgets at all.
And Tom, would it make sense? Make sure, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because it's not, my box isn't turning yellow, so I didn't know if I was coming across. So with that one too, whether or not that stands much of a chance to double the fund balance, it would be nice. But short of that, if there's not a lot of traction with regard to doubling the unrestricted, creating some other fund balance opportunities and reserve accounts would be useful as well. I mean, you think about the potential cost for special education. If you have 2 or 3 students move in who are placed out of district, you could be talking upwards of $150,000 easily. I mean, it's not unheard of for one student to, have a cost of $90,000 or more, depending on the level of services they need. So even if there's no interest, let's say, on the part of the legislators to double the unrestricted fund balance, maybe a position B could be something along the lines of, okay, well, then give us the opportunity to create reserves for these certain conditions. And one might be, special education, unanticipated costs that you might incur. So, as kind of an alternate position if they don't really agree to that.
Yeah.
I would agree. That's a good strategy.
I made note of that and we'll keep that in there. Now we get some controversial ones. Allow schools to decline to have their buildings designated as polling locations for elections. I wonder how this is going to go across if it gets out that we don't want to, I get what people are saying, that it's a burden to have people coming into their schools. I know, I forget who had talked last time about if you have elections in schools and you have people pedophiles in your district, they can't go to vote. And so what are the ramifications of that? Does anybody have any problems with it, with leaving this in though?
No.
Heads, we'll leave it in. Next one was allow schools to hold instructional days during the last 2 weeks of August, subject to collective bargaining. Any concerns about that?
Where did this come from?
That came from superintendents.
Would that increase the school days or just redistribute them?
I think it's simply redistributing them, that because and I think what they're because now Juneteenth is a holiday and there were some other holidays in there, and so there was some concern about being able to come up with the 168 days or whatever we're required to do, so that by starting the last 2 weeks of August, that would help with that, getting in those days before July 1st.
And I can't say that I know the genesis of this, but what it may also allow schools to do, because you're right, with the addition of Juneteenth and other, sometimes you get into different calendar issues when you're looking at those 180 days that you need to schedule. I don't know if people were thinking maybe the superintendent's conference days that typically precede the school year, because those count toward the 180. So maybe, depending on when Labor Day falls, I guess if it's early September, maybe this would give them the opportunity to have a superintendent's conference day, not bring students in, but it would still count for one of the days. That might have been some of the thinking behind that.
But wasn't that changed a few years ago? I thought there was I'm thinking 3 or 4 years ago that they changed to have a superintendent's day or two beforehand.
Before Labor Day, yes, but
if it gets crowded up at the beginning of the month, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and the issue here would be having, because the school year starting September 1st, trying to get staff in for a superintendent's conference day, and I suspect that's why the subject to collective bargaining is in there.
Sure.
But, again, I'm speculating as far as the reason, but just thinking that might have something to do with it.
if we're gonna advocate for this, should we also advocate for good luck for the collective bargaining? I mean, they're gonna go hand in hand.
Well, do we want to take it out?
No,
No.
I think it's a good thing. That does
Leave it
make
in?
sense.
Okay.
I mean, that's right. If it crowds it up at the beginning of September, and what, it's only gonna happen twice every 5 years, or, twice every.
Well, and my concern is this a legislative issue? I'm not sure that it's a legislative issue, or is this a state ed issue?
Well, that's a good question
Not
because,
sure.
it may be more of a state ed issue with the calendar and what constitutes the school year and when does it start and end.
Well, I'll reach out to NISBA and see if I can get some clarification from them.
Mhm.
And then if it's a state ed issue, then I think we should take it out.
Yeah.
Does anybody has any objection to that?
No, that's a good catch, I think.
Okay. Okay, next is small city schools. I know we've got a couple of them. Hold small city schools to the same debt limit regulations as other school districts. And then a bullet point, hold small city schools to a maximum debt limit of 10% of their most recent valuation. Allow small city schools to exclude state aid payments to offset bond payments from their current net debt, as other schools are currently doing. I ran this by Mark Wixon at VVS, and this would be huge for VVS. I mean, like $50 million huge. Would allow us to get state aid. So I was really surprised that and I don't know whether this, I know we've got a number of small city schools. I know somebody had mentioned, I think it was Little Falls was having issues with this also.
It's an issue for Herkimer-Boces because Little Falls is up against their debt limit already, and they're a small city school, and we're looking at a building project. And it's going to make a big difference on how we can do that, whether or not we have to go to vote, and the different limitations there. So it definitely affects Herkimer-Boces and Little Falls.
Okay.
I mean, and also, I know that Poland is right up next to their debt limit just because of our capital project recently. So it's not just cities, it's just timing, I think, for some even smaller districts that you happen to catch.
Okay, next one, superintendent. Oh, go ahead.
Tom, does there need to be a clarification on what a small city school is? I mean, that's kind of broad, isn't it, to say, because you may have an idea where someone else may have a different idea. Does there need to be more of a clarification on what are we targeting here?
There's a specific designation. Rome's a small city school, and I don't know what the but certain district, VVS is a small city school, Oneida is a small city school. And so there's a very specific designation. This isn't just a generic kind of thing that there's there's 9 different or 5 different types of school districts, and a small city school district is a specific governing jurisdiction.
So there is language for a small city school.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks.
Doesn't it have to do with what type of charter your community has? If you're considered a city as opposed to being a village or whatever. And I think that's part of where this comes from, because Little Falls is considered a city. I don't know, your other Oneida considered a city and So
Oneida,
if you're
Rome.
considered, if that's the type of charter your government has, I think that's got a lot to do with how you're classified.
Yeah.
On Utica too. I mean, they're
Yes.
the largest of the small cities.
Yeah. In fact, I understand at NISBA, there's a small city schools coalition.
I mean, if you look at CVS, Cheryl is a city, which is in their district. So, I mean, you said that would be a windfall for them. So that's probably why. Is that?
Well, I mean, it would be I didn't know. I had never heard about this. Again, this was something that came out of the superintendent's position paper. And then when I asked our financial superintendent about this, and he kind of ran some numbers, I was certainly quite surprised at the impact that it would have on VVS. And I got to believe it would have impact on other small city schools also.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Okay, next one, superintendents should be allowed to hire certified teachers to teach outside their certification field for a period not to exceed 1 year if the superintendent deems that the teacher is highly qualified. I think that's something we welcome for.
Yeah, I'm in big favor of that. I'd love it to be 2 years, but at least if we can get 1 year on the board would be great.
Oh, it doesn't say you can't add a year on after, right?
Right.
Yeah, it
Do
doesn't
1
seem to be
year.
limited, just that you're doing it every year.
Yeah, for a year at a time.
Yeah.
Well, we can leave that to the state to come up with nice vague language. You're better at that than we are.
Well, as
Okay.
superintendent, that gets my vote.
Extra flexibility, yeah. Okay, next one, this, and I have a problem with this one too. Keep local zoning authorities from second guessing SED approved plans and forcing districts to make additional changes to construction plans. I know the last time we met, there was some talk, I don't remember which district it was, but that they got their SED approved plans after they got their plans in, the local village or whatever came in and required them to make some modifications to sidewalks or to some other things. And these were plans that were already approved by SED. I mean, we're supposed to be working with our local, building our local villages and towns and boroughs and everybody. And this is kind of, seems to me saying, no, we want to have our own rules, our own way of doing things. I don't know if anybody else sees it that way. I'm just a little concerned about this, keeping this in there.
Well, I think part of the process when we do capital project work, our project managers are working with those municipalities when they're creating the plans. I mean, I know if we're, we have 5 towns, if we're doing some work in, the town of, Whitestown, well, I'm assuming that the project managers are looking at the codes and working with those town offices to make sure that what we're doing complies with the local ordinances. I mean,
I agree.
Part of what they're doing.
Does anybody have an objection if I took this out?
No.
I'd love to ask who it was. I do remember the discussion, but I can't remember who brought it up. I thought you were the one who brought it up, Tom.
I did bring it up because it was like I said, it was in the superintendent's paper. So I just, copied and pasted everything that was in there. And we did talk a little bit about it, but as we were talking about it, as I was thinking about it, it's like, I'm not sure I like this idea. It's gone.
We can always put it back next year.
Yes, if we come up with, absolutely. Thank you, Tom.
Or you could hire a better project manager.
Yeah, and I agree. I know since then I've been thinking about that, shouldn't the school, somebody in the school reach out to the local jurisdictions and say, hey, does this meet your whatever ordinances you have?
We'll trade in that for the discussion about the pilot. How about
there you
that?
go. Okay. And then we're down the last one. The creation of charter schools should not be at the expense of existing school districts. First bullet point is require district approval for any new or expanded charter schools if the number of charter school students exceeds 5% or more of the district enrollment. Bullet 2, when state aid is reduced to the existing district, aid to the charter school should also be reduced. And the third bullet is fund charter schools from their own aid category and not from the host school districts where students come from. Guessing that's pretty.
I like that second one a lot.
Yep.
If state aid gets reduced, especially as new numbers might come around.
Can I ask for just a little clarification on that one?
Yes.
Just so I understand the first one, require district approval for any new or expanded charter school if the number of charter school students exceeds 5% or more of the district enrollment.
Yes.
Is that 5? So are we looking at a case where, okay, a charter school is going to open and they're going to, I just don't know, when does that 5%, it seems like that could change over time. And if the school's already in existence, how do we approve a new school if they start off at, say, 2%, but then they're at 7% after 5 years?
I think the issue was expanded charter schools, that some schools were starting off at, like you said, 2%, and then they were expanding. And the point is that when they get to 5%, at that point, the district would say, hey, you guys are getting too big. You're approaching 5% of our district enrollment. You can't expand anymore, was my understanding of that.
Okay, so it's approval for the expansion.
Yeah, for
Okay.
any new or expanded charter, but I think the emphasis is really on the expanded charter schools, because you're right. I don't know how many times a charter school would open up and brand new would take 5% of the student population away, but I can see it creeping up, and so that's why the expanded I think is in there.
Okay.
The other thing I'm wondering too is what district would it be? Because there's a charter school in Utica, and Brian, they've got some of our kids in there, don't they?
Yeah.
They do. They
So is
do.
it 5% of Whitesboro's or is it 5% of Utica's?
Yeah.
And I
I
know
just-
they don't draw from just Whitesboro and Utica, I'm sure.
yeah.
Maybe that's how they ride the line, is get a few percent from here or there, or, 2 or 3 districts. Makes you wonder if are they getting some from Frankfurt as well?
I think the thought is 5% of the district.
Of the host district.
Of the home district.
Yeah.
So it'd be 5% of Utica.
That's,
Right.
yeah.
Yes. But again, somebody could do a charter school. I mean, in Remsen, you know what I'm saying? Which would
Right.
be a lot lower floor.
Yeah, I guess if maybe we have just a real clear understanding of what we're asking for there, because I know, if there's any ambiguity, then the legislators will say, well, what do you mean by this? And just having that answer of this is what we mean, and at least just a clearer understanding. I'm sure whoever authored it, it makes perfect sense, but it's one of those, I'm just having a hard time getting my head around it.
Jim, do you know how much that Utica Charter School has expanded over the last few years?
Well, they started K6, Robert. Now they're K8 with the Frankfurt campus, and I'm sure they're going to go to K12.
I'm with you. I don't know if it's for new. That might be hoping an awful lot. I don't know if anybody knows what Hochul is, her position is on these, but I think you aim for the expanded part and you focus on that. I mean, because if they've already got it, until they have financial issues, you at least want to keep them contained as best you can.
Right.
But that's a neat thing to hear about, some kids from Whitesboro going to these, that crosses the lines. How do you define what 5% is? Yeah, especially of Utica. That's, a huge percentage.
I know when Frankfurt sold that property, they had just come back to expand, and we researched to make sure we weren't going to be responsible for any of that, which it all falls back on Utica because it's out of Utica. So that 5%, I think that they're talking about would be Utica's problem.
Right. Well, why don't we clarify that, Tom? Okay,
Yep.
we can before we take. All right, Brian.
I put a note right in there, must get clarification or take out. So again, I'll reach out to NISBA and see. I wouldn't be surprised if this is more of a downstate issue, that they've got, the big charter schools that they had down there. So see if we can get some clarification and see if it really makes a difference for us up here.
But you take a look at 5% of the Utica schools, and then if they start targeting Whitesboro, Oriskany, New Hartford, or whatever, they can pull a tremendous amount of students out of those places and still be less than at 5% of the Utica school.
Yep.
Those smaller schools, how many students do they need to lose?
Like the kids from Whitesboro, I wonder if they build that back to Whitesboro.
The aid follows the student. So if somebody goes, a Whitesboro student goes to a charter school, then the aid is going to follow that.
It's going to follow.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I have for the paper. Is there anything that I've left out or that's been left out of the paper that people want to add?
No, I think you've done a good job, Tom.
We don't want to make it too big or they won't read it.
Right.
But Tom, great job. Great job.
Well, hopefully we can get this on one sheet of paper, if they're a little bit creative with it and stuff. And then, I'd like to hopefully do a front and back like we did well, I think, I forget, last year whether it was 2 pages or not, but I know we've had a, 1 page.
Yeah, Tom, last couple of years, it's just been front and back of
Front
one
and back.
page. Yeah, yeah.
And that keeps it nice.
Yeah, and then we
Yep.
can use the January legislative meeting to expand on these things
Right.
and talk
Yeah.
a little bit more about them. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I
Hey,
think we're
Tom.
good then.
Tom,
Thank you.
Tom,
Yeah.
so listen, after tonight, we can get that down to the Herkimer print shop, okay?
I'll send it to Charlie tonight.
Yeah, and then we can ask for a couple of drafts to make sure it's okay from
Right.
the layout and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds great.
I will take care of that. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you for this work, Tom. You've done a
Yep.
great
Thank
Thank you,
job.
Tom.
You're very
Yep.
welcome.
Thank you.
Well done.
Nail it.
Thank you.
Have a great night, everybody.
Yep.
All right, and Tom, I'll send you that letter for the legislators, right?
I'll get that sent out.
All right, thanks, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
Bye-bye.
you.
night, guys.
Good night. Good night, Robert.
Good night.
I like your backsplash.